close your eyes for a moment and think back to when you were a kid. Do you remember the circus? The smell of popcorn and sawdust? That hush that would fall over the crowd right before something amazing happened?
It really was something else, wasn't it? Such spectacle.
Absolutely. The animals, the costumes, the sheer wonder of it all. But for all its spectacle and bright lights, the circus world also had a darker side. And today, we're going to deep dive into two captivating stories that explore exactly that.
Oh, that sounds intriguing.
We're going to start by going all the way back to 1918. Back then, the circus traveled by train. And in June of that year, one of those circus trains, the Hagenbeck-Wallace, was involved in a horrific wreck.
A stark reminder of a bygone era, really.
It really is. And then we're going to fast forward to the 21st century to explore the chilling story of the Watcher.
Oh, that's a modern tale, isn't it? About a family who was terrorized by anonymous letters after moving into their dream home.
Exactly. It's a story that gets at our deepest fears about privacy and security. But before we get to those chills, let's set the stage for the Hammond Circus train wreck. Picture America in 1918.
Okay, I'm picturing it. World War I is ending. The Spanish flu is ravaging the nation. People are just desperate for something to lift their spirits, a little bit of joy amidst all the hardship.
That's exactly right. And the circus was offering just that, that much-needed escape, that little bit of joy and wonder.
And the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus was one of the ones bringing the joy. They weren't the biggest circus out there, but they were known for some really great elephant acts. And they had a really diverse cast of performers.
They did. Over 250 performers. And get this, their highest-paid performer was a woman named Rosalind. She was an equestrian.
An equestrian? I wonder what she made.
Well, the equivalent of about $500,000 a year today.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
It is. I guess people really love those equestrian acts. But they had all sorts of performers. They had trapeze artists, the flying wards, for example, and strongmen like the Dirks brothers.
The Dirks brothers. Now, weren't they the strongmen that would let elephants walk on them?
Yes, they were. They were incredible. And of course, no circus is complete without a clown. And for the Hagenbeck-Wallace circus, that was Big Joe Coyle. He was so dedicated, he actually copyrighted his costumes and makeup.
So how did all of these performers and animals travel around the country back then?
By train. Railroads completely revolutionized the circus because they could cover these vast distances, reach bigger audiences than ever before.
Yeah, I bet those trains were a sight to see.
They were. But those trains were also risky. I mean, this was the early 20th century. A lot of those cars were made of wood and lit by kerosene lamps.
Oh, I can see where this is going. Not a good combination if there's an accident.
You're right. And on June 22, 1918, that's exactly what happened. The Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus was on its way from Michigan City, Indiana, to Hammond. They'd just done a charity show at the state penitentiary in Michigan City. And they were traveling two separate trains, one for the animals and livestock and one for the performers and staff.
Makes sense. Keep those animals separate.
Right. And the second train, the one with the performers, was the one with all the wooden cars and kerosene lamps. Plus, the engineer, Alonzo Sargent, well, he was dangerously fatigued. He'd been working a 24-hour shift.
Oh, wow. That's asking for trouble.
You're telling me. And then a series of missed warnings just compounded the problem. The crane's brakeman had found an overheated bearing. They stopped the train near Hammond, taking safety precautions. But Sargent, he was asleep at the wheel. He missed all the signals, all the warnings.
Oh, no. What happened?
Well, the second train, it was going at about 50 to 60 miles an hour when it slammed into the back of the first train. And you can just imagine the impact, a scene of pure chaos and destruction.
It was awful.
Survivors later talked about being thrown through the air, surrounded by flying debris, bodies. It was a nightmare of splintered wood and smoke and the screams of the injured.
And then the fire, right?
Yes, the kerosene lamps ignited. And of course, the wooden cars went up in flames very, very quickly.
Oh, it's just horrifying to think about all those people trapped.
It really is. But there were also these incredible acts of heroism. Survivors, many of them injured themselves, were risking their lives to try and pull others from the burning wreckage.
Just amazing. It's like even in the face of such horror, that human instinct to help others just takes over.
Yeah. One survivor, a ticket seller named A.F. Roberts, he described it later as a great flaming hell of tortured souls. He actually said he saw other injured people helping with the rescue efforts, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it really says something about the resilience of the human spirit to find courage and compassion even in those moments of absolute chaos.
It really does. But for some, the loss was just too much. Remember Big Joe Coyle, the clown?
Uh-huh.
Well, he'd been thrown from the train in the impact, and then he had to watch as the cars carrying his wife and two young sons went up in flames.
Oh, no. That's just heartbreaking.
It is. I mean, he was badly injured, but he still tried to tear through the wreckage to get to his family. They actually had to restrain him from going back into the burning train.
It's just unimaginable to see your family trapped like that and not be able to do anything.
I know. He said later that he wished he had died with them.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah. And to make matters worse, the emergency response was really slow. I mean, this was 1918, there was no 9/11, and communication was limited. It took almost 30 minutes for the first fire engines to arrive.
30 minutes. That's a lifetime in a situation like that.
I know. And even when they got there, they had trouble fighting the fire because they didn't have enough water.
So what happened in those 30 minutes?
Well, the circus community, they basically became first responders themselves. The performers, the roustabouts, anyone who could, they were pulling people from the wreckage, trying to treat injuries, comfort those in shock.
It's really inspiring, you know. Despite everything they had lost, they came together to help each other.
They did. It speaks volumes about that close-knit nature of the circus.
Mm.
They relied on their skills and their resourcefulness to do whatever they could.
And I read that that sense of community extended to the hospitals.
It did. In the hospitals, survivors rallied to care for the injured. There were cowboys from the Wild West shows. A lot of them had experience handling injuries, from their rough and tumble lifestyle, so they were stepping in as nurses. It's just remarkable. There was a real display of unity and compassion in the face of this horrific tragedy.
So how many people died in the wreck?
Well, 86 were confirmed dead, but the actual number might be higher because circus life was so transient.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess there wasn't always a lot of documentation.
Exactly. Some of the victims were never identified.
Oh, wow. What happened to them?
Well, they were buried with nicknames or just descriptions like unidentified male or female.
That's so sad.
It is. It's a real reminder of the human cost of this tragedy. Each of those unidentified individuals represents a life cut short, a story that we'll never know.
I wonder if they held a funeral service for them.
They did. 4 days after the wreck, there was this massive funeral service held at Showman's Rest. It's a section of Woodlawn Cemetery outside Chicago.
Showman's Rest. I've heard of that. Isn't it specifically for circus folks?
That's right, the Showman's League of America. They bought those plots of land to make sure no one in the circus industry would ever face a pauper's grave.
Oh, that's amazing. It shows how much they cared for each other, even in death.
Absolutely. And Joe Coyle, he was at that funeral, still grieving the loss of his family. He eventually returned to clowning, but only as what they call a sad clown. His act was always kind of marked by that tragedy he had endured.
Wow, that must have been so powerful to see.
Yeah. But the circus owner, Ed Ballard, well, he didn't attend the funeral.
Really? Why not?
He was already back on the road trying to rebuild the circus.
Wow. Some might say that's a bit callous, but I guess in a way it's understandable.
Right. I mean, it was his way of coping, keeping the show going, honoring those who were lost by ensuring that the circus family survived.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. He borrowed performers and equipment from other circuses. And unbelievably, the Hagenbeck Wallace was back on track within days. They only missed 2 scheduled performances.
That's incredible. What a determined guy.
He was. But despite his best efforts, the circus never really fully recovered. 2 decades later, they filed for bankruptcy. Some people say that the Hammond train wreck was really a turning point for the American circus.
Maybe. I mean, the circus was already facing competition from things like radio and movies.
True. But the wreck, it definitely dealt a blow to the industry. It took away some of that magic.
Yeah, I can see that. So what about Showman's Rest today? What's it like?
Well, they still hold an annual Memorial Day service there. It's a way to honor the victims of the Hammond crash and to celebrate the lives of all circus performers.
That's really beautiful. It's a fitting tribute to a world that brought so much joy to people, a world that was forever changed by that tragic day.
It is. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Hammond Circus train wreck. It's a story filled with tragedy and resilience and loss, but also, I think, a reminder of the incredible strength of the human spirit and the power of community. Okay, so from the sawdust and spectacle of the early 20th century, let's fast forward to a much more recent story, one that might hit a little closer to home for a lot of us.
You mean the story of The Watcher?
That's right. It's a story that really gets at those modern anxieties, about privacy and security, and that unsettling feeling that maybe someone's watching us. And it all takes place in the seemingly idyllic town, Westfield, New Jersey. Think like Picture-perfect homes, tree-lined streets, that classic American suburb.
The kind of place where you'd think you'd be safe.
Exactly. But that's what makes this story so unsettling, because it reminds us that, darkness can lurk beneath even the most pristine facades. So picture this. It's 2014, and this couple, Derek and Maria Broaddus, they just bought their dream home in Westfield. It's a beautiful 6-bedroom Dutch colonial.
Must have cost a pretty penny.
It did $1.3 million. But they were ecstatic, living the American dream, loving family, beautiful home, safe neighborhood.
But then the letters started arriving.
Right. Just days after closing on the house, Derek finds this strange letter in the mail. It's addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Briss, their last name, but misspelled.
Creepy.
Yeah, it's definitely unsettling. And the letter itself, it's weird. It talks about the house's history, makes these references to young blood, and claims that the writer's family has a legacy of watching the property. The tone is strange. It's almost like the writer is being familiar, but in a really creepy way.
So what did they do?
Well, initially they tried to just brush it off as a prank. But deep down, they couldn't shake this feeling that something was wrong.
Oh, I bet. I'd be freaked out.
Yeah, me too. And then 2 weeks later, another letter arrives. And this time, the tone is much more threatening. The writer mentions the contractors who are working on the house, asks if they've found what's in the walls yet, and even talks about seeing one of the Broaddus children painting on the front porch.
So the writer is, like, watching them.
Exactly. It's clear they're monitoring the family. This isn't just some harmless prank anymore.
It's stalking.
It is. And the details in this second letter, they're chilling. The writer's talking about filling the house with young blood. There were these veiled threats about the children's safety. The Broadduses are terrified. They stop bringing their kids to the house, and they contact the police.
And I'm guessing the police didn't find anything.
No, the letters were untraceable. It was a nightmare. They had this dream home that was suddenly a source of constant fear.
Did they have any idea who might be sending the letters?
Well, the police initially focused on the family next door. They were a bit eccentric. They lived there for decades. And one of the sons had a history of, peering into windows.
Oh, that's suspicious.
It was. And their timeline kind of matched up with what was mentioned in the letters. Plus, the son had schizophrenia, but he denied any involvement. And there wasn't any real evidence to link him to the letters.
So a dead end.
Yeah, basically. But then, at the end of July, a third letter arrives. And it's even more graphic and disturbing than the previous two. It talks about accidents and illnesses, even death. At this point, the Broadduses decide they can't move into the house.
I don't blame them. Who could live like that?
Right. But it was a heartbreaking decision, and it came at a huge cost, financially and emotionally.
So what did they do?
They tried to sell the house, but who wants to buy a house with a stalker? They disclosed the letters to potential buyers, but that made it even harder to sell. It was a terrible situation. They even considered tearing the house down and building 2 new ones on the lot.
Yeah.
But the town rejected that.
Oh, wow. So what did they end up doing?
They ended up renting the house, but the letters continued. They were addressed to them and to the new tenants.
The watcher was relentless.
Totally. And the letters, they even started to talk about soldiers of the boulevard who supported the watcher. It was like the writer was trying to create this sense that they had eyes and ears everywhere.
So creepy. Did they ever find out who it was?
Well, in 2018, they decided to go public with their story. A New York Magazine article came out detailing their ordeal, and it really blew up.
I remember that. It was a huge story.
It was. It really captured the public's imagination, I think, because it tapped into those fears we all have about privacy and security.
Exactly. It made you wonder, could this happen to me?
Right. And the article also revealed some issues with the initial police investigation. They hadn't taken the threats seriously enough, and the focus on the neighbor, well, it was a dead end.
So who was it?
They still don't know. DNA testing on the envelopes showed that a woman had sealed them, but it wasn't the neighbor. The Broadduses even offered to pay for forensic genealogy testing, but the police declined.
Wow. So they never found out who was terrorizing them.
No. Eventually, they sold the house in 2019 at a loss, and they finally got some peace of mind, but they lost their dream home and a significant amount of money.
That's terrible. But at least they got away from the watcher.
Right. But here's the thing. The story doesn't quite end there. The new owners, they've reported strange incidents, mysterious alarms going off, and lots of calls to the police for trespassing.
So maybe the watcher's still out there.
Maybe. Or maybe the house has just become this magnet for unwanted attention because of all the notoriety. Either way, it's a story that leaves us with a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah.
Who is the watcher? What are their motives? And what does it say about us, that we're so captivated by stories like this?
It is fascinating, isn't it? It makes you think about the darker side of human nature and the anxieties of our modern world.
It does. From the tragedy of the Hammond Circus train wreck to the unsettling mystery of the Watcher, we've explored two stories that, despite being separated by time, both touch on these universal themes of loss, resilience, and the fragility of dreams. But they also make us think about the darker side of human nature and the anxieties of our modern world, a world where privacy feels increasingly elusive and the line between observer and observed becomes dangerously blurred. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this lingering question. In an age of increasing surveillance and social media, are we all becoming the watched? It's something to think about. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and maybe, just maybe, keep those lights on a little longer tonight.